Welcome to Teal Talk, a podcast brought to you by the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. That's OAESV for short. I'm your host, Laurie Hurley, and in each episode, I'll speak with professionals in the field to dive deep into the intersectional issues that affect survivors in Ohio. Before we begin, I want to give a content warning that we will be discussing sexual violence and other issues that may be upsetting and triggering. If you need help, please call our resource line at 888-886-8388 during regular business hours, or the Ohio Sexual Violence Helpline 24/7 at 844-644-6435. Please take care of yourself. Hello, and welcome back to Teal Talk. This is a podcast where we explore the many ways that we can better support survivors of sexual violence and build safer, more informed communities. I'm your host, Laurie Hurley, and today we're talking about a topic that doesn't get nearly enough attention: sexual violence in later life. When we picture a survivor, many of us probably don't picture someone in their 70s or 80s, but the reality is sexual violence can happen at any age, and older adults deserve the same belief, support, and access to services as anyone else. In this episode, we're talking about some of the unique challenges older adults face and exploring what advocates, caregivers, family members, and all of us can do to create communities where older adults feel safe, respected, and heard. Joining me today is CeCe Norwood. If you've been in this field for a little bit of time, that name is very familiar to you. CeCe is a longtime advocate, educator, and consultant whose work has focused on violence prevention, victim advocacy, and building healthier communities. She'll share a little bit about her background when we dive in, but a notable highlight is that she is the founding board president and past interim executive director for the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. And she is also a current member of our Survivor Empowerment and Advisory Council. So she has been with OAESV since the beginning and is still connected to us today. This conversation is one that I have wanted to bring to the podcast for many years now. So without further ado, let's get to chatting with CeCe. Hello, CeCe, and welcome to Teal Talk.
Hello. Thank you. I appreciate the invite.
Is this your first podcast ever?
Yes, it is. And so this will be interesting, but I am looking forward to it. I've done radio before, but not this whole podcast thing.
If it makes you feel any better, my first podcast ever was hosting this podcast. So,
oh, my Lord.
Yeah. I promise we're going to talk about a topic that you feel well-versed in discussing. So I'd love to hear a little bit about yourself and your story and what makes you so well-equipped to talk about this specific topic of elder abuse and sexual violence in later years.
Wow. I guess there's a lot of different reasons. Let me just say, how I got involved with anti-sexual violence work was because I'm a survivor, of child sexual abuse. I had a rape experience, domestic violence was thrown in there. And life was a whirlwind in my, early years. But in 1989 is when I felt like I had gotten far enough in my healing that I could reach back and begin to help other people. And so, but up until that point, I am sure I've sent some therapist kids to college. That's how much therapy I had. I did groups, I read books. I mean, everything trying to, to get back to myself. But anyway, in 89, I started Nirvana Now. And Nirvana Now is an anti-sexual violence organization. And what we do is provide, direct services to survivors and co-survivors, Oh, we do referrals. And then about 3 years ago, we started a nonprofit. And that nonprofit is the Black Survivors of Sexual Assault Institute. So now, as part of Nirvana, now we have the Black Survivors of Sexual Assault Institute as our nonprofit. And the focus there, obviously are Black and African American identified survivors. And so we provide some of the same, same services, but more of an Afrocentric, approach to survivorship, if you will. So I've been around, quite a while, quite a while. I was even involved with getting the Ohio Alliance, started because there was a period of time, like 3 years or something, where we didn't even have a state coalition. And, that was like, whoa, wait a minute, that makes no sense at all. And so there was about a half a dozen of us, that kind of came together and got the founding of, the Ohio Alliance, started. It's just amazing, to see the Ohio Alliance, now. And yeah, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful to see how it is now and how it continues, to flourish. So that's kind of my humble beginnings, in all of this.
You could count the amount of people on your hand. That's how small the coalition was, being at the helm of it to now seeing where it's gone. That's pretty amazing.
Yes. For a short while, I was the, sort of the interim, I guess, director. Definitely was not my goal, having Nirvana now. But, that also, gave me another opportunity too to kind of see some of the inside of it. So when we hired our first director, I could go back to my, board president role and, function from that perspective. And that was a better fit for me, anyway. But now we got Rosa, and it's just have flourished. It's totally flourished. So all of us are very proud of it.
Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yourself and your story. I'm sure in your decades of experience, you've come across survivors of all ages. Are there any conversations or moments that come to mind when you hear the words elder abuse?
Yes, unfortunately. And you're asking that question takes me back, many years ago when I was asked by a social worker in a building for seniors and disabled veterans. And she had contacted me because the women in the building in particular were very uncomfortable. A lot of inappropriate overtures, sexual overtures were being made to them. Uncomfortable to the point where many of them were even afraid to go to the laundry room, and do their laundry. And so she asked me to come, and talk, with the folks who came, which was a really fairly large group of people. I was sort of surprised about that, at least at that time. We had our conversation, but I think what I was most amazed about was at the end. At the end, we had finished up, and there was probably about a half a dozen, women who were standing there waiting to talk with me. And these were seniors, right? 65 plus, and each of them in their own way, either whispered to me, never audibly, about how they were, had been raped or they had been sexually abused as a child. They never told anyone. And I'm looking at these women, 60s, 70s, 80s, and I just felt for them because it's like, how do you hold on to that? All of these years to the point where, and I truly hope, that them saying this to me was a release, for them, because I know, to carry that around all these years and how having those experiences can oftentimes negatively, impact, how the trajectory, of your life. And so that started my sensitivity to seniors and really trying to seek them out because that's the other thing. They can be a little hard to find, because of the secrecy of the generations, in which they were raised. You just didn't talk about it. That's just what happened. And so, yes, we do have that opportunity, and we continue to try to seek out seniors and letting seniors know that, we are here and, all of that kind of good stuff. So that they too can get some sort of release by being able to have a place where they can go and share what their story is.
It's honestly heartbreaking to think about how those women had to carry those experiences for decades.
Yeah.
It really drives home the point that whether or not a survivor has shared their story out loud, it's still an experience that stays with them throughout their entire lives.
Mm.
Just because you haven't shared your story aloud doesn't mean it just disappears with time.
Yes.
We hear a lot about child sexual abuse or violence against younger adults, but much less about older survivors. What is it that makes older adults uniquely vulnerable?
Well, perpetrators choose vulnerable people, period. And who in our society are the most vulnerable? Children and elders. The folks who are least likely, to be able to protect themselves. And so, unfortunately, as you said, elder sexual abuse is, we don't know a whole lot about it because of the secrecy. And I, in preparation for a meeting today, I thought, let me go and see what, the state of Ohio says, about the number of elders who have been sexually abused. And I was a little bit surprised, to find out that all of the abuses, that an elder can, experience, like financial abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, and those kind of things, we clumped them together. So we can't really pull, the number out. I even look nationally. It's like, okay, nationally, what does it look like? We don't really have a definite number, even there, but the CDC says, well, 1 out of 10 elders every year is sexually assaulted. The most accurate number, or the closest number I could find, was from the U.S. Sentencing Commission. And they said that in 2025, out of about a little over 66,000 cases, about 1,400 of them, were sexual abuse cases. Well, those are the ones that are known, and we know in general that the number that we know of is totally never ever a representation of the number of children, adults, elders that have been sexually assaulted, just because of that, the shroud of secrecy, that we have over this whole thing. And so we know that at least in Ohio, that the AG's office, is really on elder abuse in general, in terms of that we've got this elder abuse commission, going on. It's a lot further than what it used to be, most assuredly. But I think that we've got a lot of seniors out here that could definitely uh, use some help. Put it that way, if they knew where to go. If they knew where to go.
It's difficult to even know the true scope of this issue because so much goes unreported.
Yes, yes, it's unfortunate.
Even when older adults do come forward, there can be so many barriers like ageism, assumptions about memory or cognition, the fear of losing independence, or
Yeah,
even worrying that speaking up could make their situation worse if they're relying on that person for care.
yeah.
What does believing older survivors and responding in a trauma informed way actually look like in practice?
Well, the unfortunate thing is that, when a survivor, elder survivor, does get up the nerve, has the ability, to tell people that this has happened to them, more times than not, they're not believed. They're not believed because for some reason, there, there's this connection between, as you're getting older, you've lost all capabilities, that yes, there are certain, population of elders that, have cognition problems, dementia and things of that nature. All right, got that. But there's a whole bunch of us, myself included, where that is not where we are. We have the ability, we've got the cognition that we can, tell people what has happened. But, one, we're not believed. Secondly, when we think about some of our elders, their vulnerability sometimes might be medically. They may have somebody that is taking care of them, a caregiver of some sort. We know that sexual abuse in general, the folks who are doing this, they know the person. They could be in their family, or they could be a caregiver at an institution somewhere. And so now they're concerned about, well, retribution. What if I tell, and nobody believes me, and this person continues to be my caregiver? Now what? Are they going to give my medication, bathe me, feed me, be mean to me, physically, emotionally, in some kind of way? Or if it's a family member, I don't want my family member to get in trouble. That's not what I'm trying to do. I just want the abuse, to stop. But if our world approaches this as, oh, they're old, they don't know what they're talking about. It's a really good shroud that perpetrators can hide under, particularly if there is something diagnosable that's going on. And there's lots of stuff out there now about congregate care, even the fancy dancy places where people are spending $5,000-10,000 a month to live in these fancy dancy places. It's still happening there. If you look at the U.S. Sentencing Commission, 89% is happening in those types of settings. It's very disturbing, particularly when we consider that the age of our population is growing more and more. And a lot of that has to do with my generation, the baby boomers. We're all getting old, and we were a big generation. And the concern, of my generation is like, who gonna take care of us? And what is going to be my vulnerabilities, particularly if I'm in a position where I cannot take care of myself, and then and or add on that maybe I do have some cognition problems. And that's why I think it continues, to go on. The other piece, seniors are sexual beings too. And so it doesn't mean that as a senior that, I don't appreciate, intimacy or, closeness and things of that nature. But as with anything, that's with consent. And just because, I'm older does not mean that consent gets thrown out the window. And of course, as we know, consent is all the way through. Maybe I'm just consenting to hold your hand. Maybe I'm just consenting, to hug you, but there's other stuff you bring in. No, now we don't cross the line, but it takes us back to, if I say something, who is going to believe me? And that is that dilemma, that a lot of seniors find themselves in. And that's most distressing because this is supposed to be the time of life where you're enjoying yourself, where you are around people who care about you, who are willing to take care of you as you may have done them. And then, to find yourself in this type of situation. Yeah. Sad, 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 sad.
Yeah. And we focus so much of prevention education on younger populations.
Yes.
Because, we would like to think that people don't need to be reminded about consent when they're 60 because we hope that they've learned it already.
Yes.
But there is that vulnerable piece where people can see an opportunity to have power over someone and they'll just kind of latch on to that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I'm also thinking about the role of everyone in these settings, not just advocates, but receptionists and nurses and housekeeping staff. It really takes an entire community of people who know what to look for. Can you talk a little bit about how folks can recognize signs of abuse, even maybe when someone isn't able to safely disclose?
Yeah, looking for signs is tricky, period. When you think about, sexual violence, what would be obvious, of course, would be, someone with their clothes half torn off, running down the street, screaming and hollering. Yeah, I mean, that would, definitely get attention. But when we think about, what happens more times in real life, it's not quite that obvious. It's just not that obvious unless, someone is looking at that senior's body. Maybe might see some abrasions or maybe some tearing, of some sort. Maybe they might see some bruising on their body, some defensive, wounds that might be there as they're trying to, to hold somebody off. But it is very, very, very difficult. But, some of the red signs, in addition to what, I already talked about, are having intentional conversations, with seniors about this, because in our world, I don't know what's going on. Why we don't want to talk about sex, sexuality, just in general. Where do I come from? I came from the product of two people having sex. And yet and still we want to keep our children, we want to keep our elders, and in some ways, ignorant, of all of this, so that when something happens, and they're trying to tell, or they're not, something is going on and people are trying to pick it up. Sometimes it is a little hard to do that unless there are, some obvious signs. Sometimes if it's not physical signs, maybe that person may seem a little off, maybe emotionally. For example, they might be crying, a little bit more hypersensitive. But either way, other than something very, very obvious and people believing, it really requires that somebody even has that on their mind. that maybe sexual abuse is going on. Because I don't think that when people think about abuse of elders, the first thing that comes to mind is sexual abuse. It just doesn't. I think the first thing that comes to mind, because it's on TV all the time, is financial abuse. That's what you hear about: financial abuse, when, there's so many other abuses, including sexual abuse, that we don't hear about. And people, as you said a moment ago, in one way is that we look at elders as being asexual. Who would want to have sex with a 60-year-old or 70-year-old or 80-year-old? Yeah, a lot of people, and a lot of people do in a healthy way. We unfortunately are talking about, those situations where people are not approaching these seniors, in such a healthy way. The other thing that I think they will require is that institutions, organizations, as part of their, training, ongoing professional development, that this becomes a part of the conversation, so that everybody who works there, from that front desk person to the person who is cleaning up, after the elders, that they too, are attuned to what might otherwise, be some signs that this person has been approached, inappropriately. But you've got to be attuned, I think, to some of those, things, as well. I don't know. A couple of other things that are definitely no brainers. Somebody gets an STI, you know, now all of a sudden they've got a sexually transmitted infection. Whoa, wait a minute. Where did that happen from? How did that occur? Vaginal bleeding, anal bleeding, also could be signs, but these are things that that front desk person wouldn't see, necessarily. And just might say, oh, Miss CC is just having a bad day today, and just blow it off as that, when they may not pay attention to Miss CC every day, and or may not even report that, wow, last couple of days she seems to be sitting over there in the corner, something that would let people know that things are different, either in an institution or even in somebody's home, where you've got people who are coming and going, and we've dealt with that even with my mom, who's 89, of people coming and going, taking care of medical stuff, people coming and, taking care of the housekeeping. Oh yeah. When people come, there's one of us there, because I don't know. I guess I'm tainted. I don't give passes to anybody because the other folks that are not talked about, who are also a part of the perpetration, are professionals, medical people, folks that provide home health care, all those people that we want to give our 100% trust to, are unfortunately, some of them, taking advantage of that very trust that we're giving them. And so we have elders who are living in fear. It's not right. It's not right at all.
Yeah. One thing I'm hearing you say is that recognizing abuse isn't always about looking for one obvious sign. It's about paying attention,
Yes.
creating opportunities for conversation, and making sure people know they're safe enough to share if something has happened.
Hmm.
And I think people forget that we are all aging.
Oh, yeah.
And what you're describing really comes back to ageism. Sometimes we unintentionally assume that because someone is older, they aren't capable of making their own decisions.
Oh, yeah. When in reality, if we are actually going to utilize, what everybody hears about trauma informed care, then that means they are a part of the discussion, about what is going to go on, whatever the plan is going to be. And in order for them to even be a part of that discussion, there has to be some transparency, there's got to be some trust, there have to be a sense of physical safety. Because again, people don't tell, because of that concern that this caregiver, whoever, has agency over them, they think, is going to, do something in response, that has to be always first and forefront. Because who knows themselves better than the senior? They know what they need. But I just think in general, this whole ideal of aging people, we all of a sudden our society thinks, as you age, you become an nincompoop, that you can't make decisions, that you don't know your right from your left, and that's a problem with our aging society. And I think that they're out there saying, "Hey, I'm still alive." Some are still working, and doing well in their professions, but and that is, a concern sometimes that could crop up if they've got younger advocates, who may not appreciate, and understand the wisdom and knowledge that's behind, those years of living. But
Or maybe it's not that they don't value or understand,
Mhm.
but there's an age gap, right?
Yeah.
Like many people enter this field early in their careers,
Hmm.
and supporting an older survivor may be a completely new experience for them.
Hmm.
There are generational differences.
Hmm.
So, what are some practical ways that advocates and organizations can make their services feel more welcoming, more accessible, and more responsive to older adults? Like, how can we bridge those gaps?
Well, I think that it starts with the organization, in a lot of ways, and that the organization has to market, advertise themselves, through pictures, to where they send their information to let, whoever they're serving, the community they're serving, know that they work with elders. Because, sometimes if you look at, some of the promotional materials, you might see one elder maybe in the background, or, something like that, versus making it, more of a focal point, so that people know that any rape crisis center, in the state of Ohio, knows how to work with me as an elder. I can go anywhere, but I'm not quite sure that people, really know that. And so I think that, in terms of some of our younger ones who are new into the field, is one, they too, need to know how to recognize, those hidden signs that maybe there may be some sexual assault going on. They too need to know how to respond. And some of that responding is just listening, empathically listening. Some of it might be letting them, repeating back to them. This is my counseling thing, repeating back to them what it is that they've said to them, appreciating that they've come up in a generation where this was not something that was talked about, or they grew up in a generation where there was, wars going on, and, famine, and, all of those lived experiences that have got this elder to the place where these things may have happened years ago and they're still struggling with it. I think that sometimes folks who may be a little bit younger, if they could just think about that, and give that space, for that elder to be able to talk. Because sometimes, when you're talking with, some of our seniors, they just start talking, about all kinds of stuff that may not be on topic. But I think, in terms of building that collaboration and, that transparency and conversation, that we have to listen to that. Our elders are isolated, and so here comes an advocate, but yet here's also a person that's coming to their home or meeting them somewhere, and they just want to talk. And I think that if we allow them to do that, that then too would open up, us being able to get more information as advocates, that would then allow us to come up with better plans with them as in terms of future protection, of themselves. Um, the other thing, too, is that, the Area Office on Aging, they offer trainings that advocates can go to. Sometimes, our younger advocates who are very skilled on technology can just sit down and just start searching, and, that's that, end point in time, education that they can do for themselves. Because the last thing that an elder needs not feel is that who they are talking with doesn't get them. That's the last thing, because what's going to happen is that they're going to start shortening their conversation. Or if they're feeling like the younger person is looking at them like, yeah, here we go, right, okay. Yeah, and of course, that's not what the advocate is saying, but 85% of our communication is our body language, and so I don't know, that's the other piece of it that, I think about too sometimes, that I think would help our society to get a better understanding of elder sexual abuse, and also better, educate, our advocates about elder sexual assault, and how that plays out, in later life.
I'd like to broaden the conversation just a little bit more because we know that creating safety isn't one person's responsibility, right? Like it's something that we all contribute to.
Mhm.
What role can families, neighbors, faith communities, or local community organizations play in preventing elder abuse?
Yes. The biggest thing is checking in. The biggest thing is checking in on people. Because we have a whole lot of seniors who are, they're in their home. They don't have any plans. They plan to pass right there in their home. And, if they have children, the children have gone off, and living their own life and things of that nature. And so I think a big part is checking in on them. I think another piece is inviting them out of the house. Sometimes, the automatic answer, oh, no, 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 it's going to be too much trouble. But no, letting them know, hey, I'm going to go here. Or if we know of their religious or spiritual affiliations, giving them a ride, to those, types of things so they can get out. Because, sitting in the house is not going to be of assistance. And if all we see are people coming in and out of their home, how do I, as a neighbor, know that that person is treating my neighbor well? How do I know that? Well, the only way I would know is I'm going and talk to, Miss Mary and say, hey, how you doing, Miss Mary? Showing up at her house, maybe showing up when that provider comes in, just so that that person knows there's somebody looking out for Miss Mary. Even though Miss Mary lives by herself, that does not mean that she is literally, by herself. And then also, because some seniors did not get this, because of the generation of talking with them about the agency they have of their own body, and that this caregiver who is giving them a bath, oh, yeah, when somebody is bathing your private parts and touching your private parts, lingering on your private parts and letting Miss Mary know it's like that instinct that she had is real, and that even if she does say something, that person denies it, it doesn't make it any less real. Well, now who is Miss Mary going to tell if she's living by herself and only these, workers are coming in and out? Well, hopefully somebody in the community, would be showing up on a periodic basis so that they have some kind of connection, with her. Because it is unfortunate, and sometimes, seniors outlive the rest of their family, so there is nobody that can really come forward. And as I said, sometimes, their offspring, are involved with their life and their children and their grandchildren's lives. And something else that could be done is giving the family, if they are the ones who are providing, the care, a break sometimes. One of my sisters is a primary, and yes, all of us are not in the same town, but when she needs a break, one of us floats into town. Say, hey, we'll take this weekend or we'll take this day. Here again, as a way of not only giving, my primary sister a break, but also being able to check in with her mom to get some perspective from her. Also to let these providers who are coming in and out, oh yeah, she's got other people besides the one that you normally see. And of course, in my role as an advocate, I'm always asking questions. I'm looking, I'm watching. These folks that are serving her don't know, what I do, but oh yeah, I'm talking about it. That's for sure.
I love those examples that you shared. Checking in might seem small, but it's those small moments that help reduce isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And isolation is exactly what people who cause harm often rely on.
Mm-hmm.
You made such a good point when you shared that many older adults came of age at a time when conversations about sexual violence, consent, or like even our own bodies simply weren't happening in the way they are today.
Yeah.
So it's not just age that can make it difficult to recognize abuse, but also a lifetime of messages about not talking about sex and staying quiet or believing that these taboo topics should remain private.
Mm. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you that as I've gotten older, because I'm in my 60s now, when I'm out in the world, I operate differently, than I did in my younger years because I know that there are people who are looking for folks that they think are most vulnerable, and I'm able-bodied, I got my own stuff going on. Nonetheless, I'm aware that people who might see this gray hair might think, oh, vulnerability. So, part of the safety planning, with those seniors that are, up and about is talking about being aware of your surrounding, is talking about as soon as you get in your car, lock your door, then put your seatbelt on, that type of thing, being leery of that person who might be wanting to help you a little bit too much, can I help you go to the car? Maybe they are a wonderful person, but at least not automatically think, oh, what a wonderful person when this wonderful person may have been sitting in their car, saw you go into the store, waiting on, come out and, basically stalking. That type of information also, I think, needs to be provided, from advocates and other folks that are working with survivors so that they too can be aware of what's around. And there are bad people out there. who are looking for us.
And the learning never stops. I mean, I don't think that we should ever stop talking about certain things once you reach a certain age, because the ways people cause harm continue to evolve.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Me too. I still go to conferences and workshops and, things of that nature because things change. Things change. These perpetrators, they're very cunning. They're very good, at what they do. And I need to know, all of us as advocates, need to know what's the new thing now. What are they doing trying to, get into these seniors' home and take, advantage of them in any kind of way, most assuredly from a sexual assault perspective.
Before we wrap up, is there anything we haven't talked about today that you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I guess what my final thought, would be for all of us to remember that no matter what the age is, we all desire and want closeness, we want intimacy, we want to have relationship, with people, no matter what our age is. And we still have agency over our own bodies. And consent is still required if someone wants to get a little more intimate than what I would have otherwise thought about. And I think that if all of us remember that seniors are sexual beings, just like 20s and 30s and 40-year-olds are, maybe how we approach, might be even better for the senior that we have in front of us. Because you mentioned about shame earlier, that's a big thing, guilt, another big thing. And we've got to let that senior know within that first few seconds, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Because they're looking to see, are you really with me? Before they go on.
Yeah. Getting older doesn't mean giving up your right to make decisions about your own body. You still have a gut instinct even if you're 70. You can still trust yourself even if you're 80.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I just want to say to you, Lori, I really appreciate the Alliance, wanting to pull this subject out because, here again, elder sexual abuse is not talked about, enough. And I hope that maybe at some point other perspectives can be, addressed on an ongoing way for, advocates that are here, new advocates that are coming in, and not just sexual, violence advocates, our other fields too, the lawyers and the doctors and court personnel and all those other kind of folks so that we can change this automatic view sometimes that we have of seniors being asexual.
I'm hearing you say that we need a coordinated community response.
Yes, we do. Yes. Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And making sure that, that response team has on it elders,
Yeah.
some of whom have lived experience, some of whom just lived, that can offer that perspective to the rest of the team that usually is a little bit younger. So, and vice versa, vice versa. So, anyway, thank you, Laurie.
Thank you, CeCe. Thanks for listening to Teal Talk. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into intersectional issues affecting survivors in Ohio. If you like what you heard, subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star rating and review. Recommend us to a friend and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at OAESV. If you'd like to learn more about us and the services we offer or sign up for our email list, visit oaesv.org. And remember, we're here to help. Feel free to call our resource line at 888-886-8388 during regular business hours, or the Ohio Sexual Violence Helpline 24/7 at 844-644-6435. See you next time.